people go to their homes.
And everyone's unhappy. She didn't say this, but it's coming back to council, that staff report, right?
Of course it is.
Got it.
I'm going to use the breast.
For decision. Okay. You can put that in. It's going to. We have a long meeting. Mayor, can we take like a 5-minute break? Nope, no breaks. Can I use the restroom?
Go ahead, but okay. I'm moving forward.
Okay.
I'm going to move on to item number 9, revisions to the emergency shelter regulations to implement housing element program objectives as required by state law. And that's Mr. Hi, Mrs. Kennard. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor, members of council.
Give it 1 second until the other door closes. Little help with the other door? Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. This is a proposal to discuss revisions to emergency shelter regulations to implement housing element program objectives as required by state law. The city recently received a request from the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, for an update on the status of the city's efforts to comply with government code regulations pertaining to emergency shelters. When the city's housing element was adopted by HCD in 2013, they found it in conformance with state law, in part because there's language in the housing element that commits the city to establish land use regulations that allow sufficient housing opportunities for the homeless. A compliant housing element is required for most regional and state grant funding opportunities. And other cities in the region and the state have either already completed or are in the process right now of completing similar work programs. The city's current temporary emergency shelter regulations are located in Chapter 19.06 of the Municipal Code, and they're non-compliant with state law on 2 counts. First, because they require discretionary approval for a shelter use, and second, because they allow only for temporary facilities of up to 120 days. State law requires that cities allow year-round emergency shelters and that they be allowed by right through zoning. Cities may adopt operational standards provided that they are objective and help support the establishment of shelters. To be in compliance, a zoning ordinance amendment is required, and the city is obligated to implement these changes. Understand that this is not a proposal to commit the city to operate a homeless shelter. It's an effort to streamline the process by which the city could allow an applicant to have a request approved that wishes to open a shelter that is in compliance with state law. Okay, so the housing element established the general commercial and the neighborhood commercial zones. That's the C and the CN zones, respectively. They're shown in orange on this map. They were identified in the housing element as being the zones that were most appropriate for emergency shelters. The housing element also identified a number of development and management standards or operational standards that would be appropriate to apply to emergency standards. They're objective in nature, and they include the number of beds, parking, intake procedures, staffing levels, separation between facilities, the length of stay, lighting, security. The staff report that you were provided includes a table with comprehensive information about emergency shelter regulations that are in existence in other local jurisdictions, as well as an example of an ordinance that's been implemented by the city of Carlsbad. So staff is prepared to introduce, at the City Council's direction, options for consideration to the Planning Commission for further discussion and recommendation to come back to City Council. Thank you.
Could you specify the state law, just if you could? I know that it's lengthy, but the idea of providing the opportunities for shelters, you said in compliance with state law. What are some of those qualifications?
They're listed here on the slide. It's section 65583, A4A of the Government Code. And the zone that's provided shall include sufficient capacity to accommodate the identified need for emergency shelters and accommodate at least one year-round shelter. Permit processing, development, and management standards must be objective and encourage and facilitate the development conversion to shelters. And emergency shelters may only be subject to those development and management standards that apply to residential and commercial development in the same zone, except that a local government may apply written objective standards. So basically by right.
Do they clarify what an emergency shelter is based in difference to a non-emergency shelter?
Well, my understanding is that the emergency would pertain more to the individual's need for an emergency.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So just the only reason I'm saying that is because sometimes when people hear emergency shelter, it also could be because of a natural disaster. And so I'm just trying to clarify this is because of the individual's emergency, their need for housing, a roof over their head.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Questions from this? Yes.
And I think you said this, but I want to clearly state it for the public. We are doing this because state law requires us to do this. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And the city committed to it in the housing element.
Okay. Then I'm willing to make that motion, Mayor.
Are there any other questions for? Yes.
It's just a comment. I'll second the motion.
Yes.
And then just a couple of things, just a direction to staff or advice to staff. Really, I mean, I think one is a lot of these housing element rules, cities. Although there's been a lot of effort to try to rein in cities' discretion on this, cities still can game it pretty effectively if they want to, and not be act in good faith to these requirements. I don't want us to be taking that approach. And I think the history of La Mesa and our housing element compliance is that we don't do that. We actually operate in good faith. I think we still have a model housing element on HCD's website. I noticed that there when I worked there, and which was pretty cool. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that I would encourage staff to do as well is reach out to the interfaith network in La Mesa and the other existing providers. There are they may not be officially registered, but there are operating shelters in the winter in La Mesa, and there may be some of those groups may be. So I think there's some of them have substantial land holdings, right? So like I don't know if Journey Church wants to do this, but like if they wanted to be zoned for that, so that they had plans to maybe someday do that, I didn't notice them on that list or that map. Like that's a conversation that should be had, so that we're not just picking land without regard to who owns it or who might want to use it. So I don't know what the outcome for that is. Maybe the map looks exactly like the map as it is. Okay, but like let's make sure that we have those conversations, because that may make things easier and more effective down the line.
In addition, I think we need to catalog the groups that are doing it licensed, transitional homes, like a group like City Hope, and that would be considered emergency housing when there's a domestic violence type of situation where someone would be homeless, and that they provide that too. So I agree that we need to work in concurrence with what's existing now. So, but I'm glad that we're moving this forward, because we need to try to be ahead of the wave and be compassionate and be a city that we try to pride ourselves on these things. So we have a motion and a second. Any other oh, sorry. Pardon me. We have a public speaker. I apologize. Bonnie Baranoff. Pardon me. I apologize. I missed your card. There's a wave of cards. Welcome. Good evening.
Good evening. It's past my bedtime. I don't know about you guys. Okay.
Mine too.
Hung in for this. No, thank you. So this is kind of following up on what Colin just said. And so some of the, I'm involved in some of the local homeless initiatives here in La Mesa with La Mesa First United Methodist Church and their Fresh Start Saturday program. And I think, we were talking about this earlier hours ago, speaking of opportunities for La Mesans to make, a real positive difference in our community now and in times to come, is that also thinking about, we have to do this, right, as a city. We have to do this already. But why don't we, I humbly recommend that we consider establishing a homeless task force and or homeless focus groups here in La Mesa that work in partnership with the police department, the community development departments, business owners, select boards and commissions, to collaboratively address this issue. And this would also be a group that would actively participate with East County Homeless Task Force. I know there's a few of us from the faith-based community that go to these meetings. We never see anybody from La Mesa from this group or, other groups there, which is disheartening. But this is a special needs group, and I read through all this stuff online that it sounds like emergency shelter is for the special needs group of homelessness specifically. And I don't know about all of you, but I walked through a few people that were already setting up camp right outside these walls. We see them around the library all the time. We can't ignore these folks. This is the way it is. What do we do to be proactive about it? So I would just encourage the council and the planning commission to do something about this sooner rather than later. So that's it. Thank you.
Yes.
I made the motion before the public speaker. Is this something that we, without changing the motion, or can we consider what the speaker said and bring back a report or something? I'm not sure what that would entail or what the authorities are, but that'd be interesting to hear. Could we do something like what the speaker said?
You mean have a task force of some sort?
Yes, I guess, yes.
Don't we already
Up to
have
the
something
council.
like that?
We do participate in the
East
County Homeless
I know
Task
that
Force.
Councilman McGorder used to attend.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's kicked out.
Oh, okay.
Kicked out?
No, right.
We have
It was
staff.
suggested that a member of the
Staff.
city staff go instead.
City staff go instead of the council,
And you happen
a
to...
non-elected.
We actually, Assistant City Manager Humora and Captain Sweeney, I think, and Chief Sweeney, excuse me, Freudian slip, and Captain Sweeney go to it. So we have several different staff that attend.
Okay. That makes me feel better about the
And you
speaker's
feel
comments.
that's an adequate La Mesa representation?
Well, we actually have been having dialogues amongst the four cities, and you approved a resolution at your last meeting because there's funding coming down the pike for homeless services, and so we've been dialoguing amongst the four cities to see what would be appropriate in terms of programmatic opportunities to work with CBOs in terms of homeless services on a community-based level. What would be appropriate for La Mesa perhaps might not be appropriate for El Cajon. So those conversations are going on sort of at the same time.
And do you think we'll come back and revisit or discuss this or evaluate it or learn about this in 6 months?
It's up to the council's pleasure on that.
Well, maybe just request that keep us posted on the activities of that. An update in 6 months, what's happening. Would that make you happy, Ms. Councilman Baber?
We can absolutely do.
Okay.
Sure, of
Sure.
course.
All right.
And we're saying the four cities, obviously, we're saying Santee, El Cajon, Lemon Grove, La Mesa.
I assume those are the
Okay,
four,
right, all right. A motion and a second to approve the staff recommendation. Any other discussion, please vote.
Motion carries with all council members voting yes.